Okay, chapter 12. Chapter 12 is all about genes, medicines, and drugs. And what this chapter focuses on is, well, genes, medicines, and drugs. I don't deal as much with the genes portion. It's in your book. You can go look it up. But we will talk about medicines and drugs. And one big thing that we're going to see is that the world as we see it isn't necessarily the world as it exists. That sometimes we can have our own perception of the world. And what this chapter is really going to focus on is the use of chemicals, medicines or drugs, however you want to, we'll talk about the difference between those two, how they can affect our views of reality and our actions to see what's going to happen. They can be beneficial, they can help ease pain, but they can also remove us from the normal contact with reality. Whether that be good or bad, that can be up for discussion. So in this chapter, we're going to look at chemicals and how they affect the mind and how they can change perception. So remember, we all have our own idea of perception. So I have a couple of pictures on here that we're going to look at. The first one I want to look at is the top left-hand corner. What do you see? Well, you may see two people facing one another, or you may see a chalice that's surrounded by dark. We all have our own perception of reality. Over on the right, I have a top hat. Think Abe Lincoln here. Actually, I think that's taller than Abe Lincoln's hat. So on this hat, is it taller from top to bottom, or is it wider along the brim? It turns out they're actually the same length, but it appears as if it's taller because our mind can play tricks on us. At the very bottom, there's two arrows, two lines with hashes on the end. I don't know how you want to describe it, but which of those two lines is longer? Well, turns out, again, they are identical in length. I know the one on the right looks longer, but in reality, they're the same. So, like we've established, this chapter is going to deal with some of the chemicals that can alter our perception, whether that be the perception of pain or the perception of reality. Now, some of these compounds are natural products. Natural products means that they're produced by living organisms. You find them in nature. We don't have to do anything to them. An example of a natural product is willow bark. So if you ever watch Little House on the Prairie or Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, or any of those type shows, in the Old West, whenever they would have pain, they would boil a willow bark tea, and they would use that for a pain reliever. That is a natural product. Now today, I don't see any of you going out to the willow tree and stripping off some of the bark. Instead, we have a lot of semi-synthetic compounds and also synthetic. Semi-synthetic is based on a natural product, and we do some chemical modifications to it. One of the most common, the one we always like to talk about on that, is aspirin. We're trying to find something that's going to have more effectiveness because we want it to work better, but we want to minimize as many side effects as possible. So greater effectiveness, reduce side effects. That's our goal. Now we're also going to see some completely synthetic where they came up with an entirely new compound. We're not trying to alter something, we have something new. So we'll get to see some examples of that also in this chapter. So it's interesting to see how the development of different drugs has happened. So this one is looking at aspirin, and aspirin is based off of a natural compound that's used in willow bark. So willow bark has been used for a botanical remedy for aches and pains and fevers. That's been used since antiquity, so really long time. Hippocrates, a Greek healer, is called the father of medicine, actually wrote about this many years ago. In 1827, one of the chemical compounds was isolated from willow bark. They found that this was the effective part, the active agent that provided the pain relief, called salicin. In 1838, the salicin was converted into what's called salicylic acid. Salicylic acid is a compound that relieves fevers, pains, and inflammation, but it's really too harsh to be used as a drug, at least on our stomach. We actually use salicylic acid in acne medications sometimes, even today. So if you have an acne medication, read on the back, see if it has some salicylic acid. To make it a little bit easier on the stomach, in 1853, they added an acetyl group to it. But he didn't really know what he had at that point, so it was just kind of put on the shelf and kind of left alone. In 1893, a guy by the name of Felix Hoffmann, he's a German chemist that works for a company called Bayer. He was trying to figure out a way to help his dad. His dad had arthritis really bad, and they were looking for a pain reliever. So he synthesized acetylsalicylic acid. It's really fun to say acetylsalicylic acid, ASA. That's just aspirin. He saw the success with his dad, so he actually convinced his company, again, Bayer, and I'm sure you've heard of Bayer before. You hear about Bayer aspirin all the time, to actually market the drug. It was first sold in 1900, and it was first patented, in 1900, and it was sold in a powdered form. They would have it in little envelopes that you could take. You can still get it in that format. Goody's headache powder is probably the most common like that. Richard Petty, if you ever watch NASCAR, Richard Petty promotes Goody's headache powder. It's kind of a fun little commercial there. And it was first sold as a tablet in 1915. So think about just the amount of research that would have to go from going into a powder form to trying to figure out how to put it into a tablet form. A tablet that wouldn't disintegrate in the bottle, but that once you take it will quickly disintegrate, so you can quickly get those pain relieving effects. What type of ingredients, inert ingredients, ingredients that don't react with anything else, do you put into that tablet to hold it together for just the right length of time? There's a lot that goes into making just a tablet. So this is just a quick timeline of this semi-synthetic, because again, it's based on a natural product, but we start making some chemical modifications of it. So aspirin is considered to be a semi-synthetic product. So that's a little bit about aspirin, some of the history, but we're going to get more into the chemical compound, its advantages and disadvantages in the next couple slides.